Welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're going to be unpacking a seriously legendary folktale from the court of King Krishnadevaraya, and it features the one and only scholar and trickster Tenali Rama. But look, this isn't just some entertaining old story to pass the time. It's actually a totally brilliant look at human vulnerability, the mechanics of a con, and honestly, the true essence of faith. We're going to break down exactly how this narrative uses a very clever setup to teach a profound lesson about logic and belief. So let's get right into it. Right off the bat, I want you to keep a provocative question right at the front of your mind as we go through this explainer. And that is it religion to exploit someone's emotions for personal gain? It's a pretty heavy question, I know, but it forms the absolute core of what we are analyzing today. The story uses this premise to explore that super delicate boundary between genuine faith and manipulative exploitation. So, the narrative sets the stage by grounding us in a universal, deeply relatable human experience, which is grief and loss. King Krishnadevaraya's mother passes away, and the story tells us that in her final days, she had this lingering, unfulfilled wish. She simply wanted to eat some mangoes, but sadly couldn't before she died. Now, obviously, the king is in deep mourning. He had an immense, pure respect for his mother. But as we'll see, this profound emotional vulnerability, this desperate need to do right by her memory, is exactly what creates a massive blind spot for him. It leaves him entirely open to manipulation. Okay, let's dive into this, because this is exactly where the opportunists enter the picture. A group of greedy priests or pundits approaches the grieving king with just an absolutely audacious demand. They say, if you want peace for her soul, donate golden mangoes to us. I mean, wow. Notice the incredibly calculated nature of this demand. They aren't asking for actual edible mangoes to honor her memory. No, they're actively weaponizing the king's desire to give his mother spiritual peace, and they're translating a simple earthly dietary wish into a demand for pure, solid gold. It is a highly opportunistic plot, entirely disguised as a religious requirement. And how does the king react? Well, he donates the golden mangoes to the priests without a second thought, literally doesn't even hesitate. He doesn't pause to question the logistics of, how gold helps a spirit eat fruit. His profound grief completely overrides his critical thinking skills, entirely blinding him to the sheer, unadulterated greed that is so obviously driving the priest's request. He isn't thinking logically at all. He is acting purely out of love, sorrow, and duty. And for the priests, it's the perfect scan, because their victim is desperate enough to pay literally whatever price they set. But thankfully, not everyone in the court is blinded by grief. This is where the famous Tenali Rama steps into the narrative. And if you know anything about Tenali Rama, you know he is famous for his razor-sharp wit and incredible observation skills. Tenali instantly recognizes exactly what is happening here. He sees right through that fake religious veneer, straight to the ugly truth. These priests are actively taking advantage of the king's most vulnerable feelings. He spots the scam immediately, and, being Tenali Rama, he decides he's going to teach them a lesson they will never forget. Now, Tenali doesn't just go to the king and call the priests liars. No, that's too easy. He sets an elaborate psychological trap. First, he invites these exact same greedy priests to his own house for a religious feast. And think about it. A feast implies comfort, reward, and free food, which is exactly what greedy opportunists love, right? Then, just before the meal is served, he calmly asks his servant to heat an iron rod in the fire. Just imagine the scene. The priests are sitting there, practically drooling, expecting a luxurious dinner, and suddenly they are watching this metal rod get white hot in the flames. All Tenali has to do next is just sit back and wait for the panic to set in. The total genius of Tenali's trap lies in its sheer, terrifying absurdity. He turns to these confused, terrified priests and casually delivers this proposition. He says, "My mother had knee pain in her final days and wished to be branded with a hot iron to relieve it, but it didn't happen. So, let me touch this hot iron to your knees so my mother's unfulfilled wish can be granted." It is just a massive whiplash-inducing shift from a comfortable religious feast to a direct physical threat. And the brilliance of it is that he is mirroring the exact same premise the priest used on the king, just replacing golden mangoes with, well, physical pain. As you'd expect, the priest's reaction is immediate and entirely predictable. Pure, unadulterated panic. They back away and yell out, "What kind of logic is this? How will this fulfill your mother's wish?" It is just a beautifully ironic moment in the story. Suddenly, when it's their own physical needs on the line, these priests become intensely concerned with logical consistency and reason. They rightfully and very desperately point out that burning their knees does absolutely nothing to help Tenali's deceased mother.
And this brilliantly illustrates where the trap finally snaps shut. When you compare the two demands side by side, the hypocrisy is just impossible to deny. On one hand, the priest wanted golden mangoes to magically soothe the king's mother. On the other hand, Tenali wants to use a hot iron rod to magically soothe his mother. By breaking it down like this visually, the absurdity is crystal clear. If the logic of demanding gold for a spiritual wish is sound, then the logic of demanding a hot iron brand must also be sound. They literally cannot accept one without accepting the other.
And then comes Tenali Rama's absolute mic drop moment. He just smiles at their panic and turns their own logic entirely against them, asking, if my mother's unfulfilled wish cannot be fulfilled this way, then how did golden mangoes become necessary to fulfill the king's mother's wish? I mean, come on, this is masterful Socratic irony at work. Tenali didn't have to yell at them, he didn't have to debate theology, he simply forced them to live out the logical conclusion of their very own con. He completely dismantled their scam, using their own twisted rules. The immediate aftermath of this confrontation? Total silence. The priests have absolutely no answer. They are left entirely speechless. In a flash, they realize their fatal mistake. They've been caught red-handed in their own logical snare. With nowhere to hide and literally no argument left to make, they can only bow their heads in deep, profound shame. Just pause for a second and appreciate the utter defeat of these scammers, brought down not by force or power, but by pure wit. Naturally, the story reaches its climax when the truth of this little encounter makes its way back to King Krishnadevaraya. Once the fog of grief is finally lifted by Tenali's undeniable, logical proof, the king acts decisively. He fiercely reprimands the priests for their deceit. But he doesn't stop there. He establishes a brand new era of accountability in his realm by issuing a royal decree. He officially bans religious fraud, declaring that no one in his kingdom will ever be allowed to deceive people in the name of religion again. And of course, he heavily praises Tenali Rama for his wisdom. So, the crucial point is what the king verbalizes when reprimanding those priests. He makes this kingdom-wide declaration. The purpose of religion is to respect people's feelings, not to take advantage of them. This is such an incredibly powerful statement. It effectively reclaims the concept of faith from the hands of greedy opportunists and firmly centers it right back on empathy, respect, and basic human dignity. The narrative really distills this whole lesson down into the foundational pillars of genuine faith: service, truth, and harmony. It's not about material extraction, It's not about impossible magical transactions, and it is certainly not about demanding golden mangoes. True faith is about these grounded, community-focused, and deeply ethical virtues that actually bring people together rather than tearing them apart for a quick buck. Conversely, the story leaves us with a very stern, unambiguous warning. Fulfilling selfish motives by exploiting someone's emotions is defined here as the greatest act of unrighteousness, or adharma. It's a timeless warning that speaks far beyond the court of a legendary king. Think about it. Grief, love, desperation. These are our most sacred, vulnerable emotions. Weaponizing them for personal, selfish gain is presented as the ultimate betrayal of both societal and spiritual trust. Which brings us right back to where we started, leaving us with a final thought to ponder. Because the tale of Tenali Rama and the golden mangoes isn't just a fun historical anecdote, it's a mental model for critical thinking. How can we use logic to separate true faith from exploitation in our own world today? When someone in our modern era asks for their version of golden mangoes during a moment when you're feeling vulnerable, how do you recognize the scam before the iron gets hot? Think about that for a bit, and always try to keep your logic as sharp as Tenali Rama's.